I think the average angler fish too heavy. I think for the most part, sure, some more experienced anglers have worked it out, but for the average beginner or intermediate angler, and I think that's where we probably target a lot of what we talk about, but there'll be certainly some much more advanced stuff there too. But yeah, everyone fishes too heavy and too big. The majority of the bait fish that our Sydney kingfish feed on, and certainly in the surrounds of Sydney, anywhere there's draining rivers and estuaries, is really the anchovy is a huge part of the food cycle. And whilst the fish feed on squid and yellowtail and slimy mackerel and so on, they do spend a very large portion of their time feeding on anchovies. And if you think of a mature anchovy, it isn't big. And you're not going to throw an anchovy imitation on 50-pound leader or 50-pound line necessarily. So, yeah, I think that's it. Yeah, they fish too heavy. So there's the two things. We talk about matching the hatch, and then we talk about another thing was shocking the flock. So you can match what they're feeding on and try and get it as identical as possible, or you can do the opposite and try and throw something that's completely different and much larger and much more aggressive. And sometimes that will trigger the bite as well. But for the most part, you're always starting to try and match what the fish are feeding on. And yes, certainly in the Sydney region, those anchovies and as you mentioned, the jelly prawns, since the prawn trawlers were removed from Sydney Harbour, there has been a lot more prawns in the harbour. Now, I don't know if the species we call jelly prawn is like the northern species of jelly prawn, because the northern species is actually a small prawn and it stays that size. It doesn't grow any bigger. Yeah, but the prawns in Sydney Harbour are likely to be juveniles of your school prawn and so on that then grow up. But when they're feeding on those, that you're talking about the fish of 1,000 casts. This is as tough as any fish you've ever tried to catch. Well, it's funny you mentioned the popper with the long tails, because I've got another thing I always say, splash for cash. And any stimulus you can give a fish to try and trigger a response beyond this fussy feeding pattern that they get into. So once they lock on a certain size bait and they don't want anything else, if you can't get them by matching the hatch, it's just too hard. You have to try and snap them out of it. It's almost like someone's in a stupor and you've got to slap them around the face to get them out of it. You've got to, sometimes that shock the flock thing, it literally switches their whole behavior. And so years ago, we used to get massive schools of juvenile rat kingfish in the harbour, in their thousands, just schooling all over the surface. And they'd just open their mouths shoulder to shoulder and just gorge on this bait. And you could get in there and throw every fly and every lure in the box. And back earlier on, I had probably less techniques than I have now. And we'd throw at them, and usually you get one or two to eat over a long period, but they'd be very, very hard. We had one day where I think we were 5 hours for 0 bites. I think it was something like that. I remember the client, Michael Hookie. And Michael was this is a fly angler, but this is where I saw this happen. Finally, we'd thrown quite a few flies in, and finally he had this ugly looking thing on the dash of his boat. And I thought, that is a toilet brush. That is not a fly. What the hell is that thing? Oh, some squid fly he got from America. So we tied it on and he put it in the water, and it was quite a large fly. And I looked at it and it's nothing like the bait they're feeding on. I said, man, that thing actually looks really good once it's wet. So he threw it out into the school and he stripped it along the edge of the school. And I watched the whole leading edge of that school turn onto that fly and chase it. And about 5 casts later, he got one to eat. Now, that fly was so much bigger than what they were feeding on, and so ugly, and so actually, as it turns out, in the water, it looks great. But I just realized, what are we doing? We've got to try something really different. And that's where this shock the flock thing came in. And that turned out to be one of the biggest fish takers there is. And you can put a running sinker down onto that fly and throw it on a spin rod, and it actually works really, really well.